Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our third event in our four-part enterprise webinar series focused on eviction prevention. I'm Jacqueline Wagner, the president of the Solutions Division of Enterprise Community Partners, and I'm honored to lead a fantastic, dedicated team of mission-driven enterprisers. Enterprise is a national nonprofit housing organization that works coast to coast and is focused on three organizational-wide priorities: to increase housing supply, advance racial equity, and build resilience and upward mobility. No other organization in the country addresses America's affordable housing crisis from every angle. We create and preserve affordable homes. We own and operate rental homes and provide resident services for more than 22,000 people. We advocate for policy and best practices that drive systems change. We operate on a national scale alongside thousands of local partners with an on-the-ground presence in urban and rural communities across the country. It has never been more important to focus on efforts to prevent eviction and ensure every family has a stable home they can afford. This four-part webinar series is generously supported by JP Morgan Chase & Company. In this series, we look at the nexus between eviction prevention and housing preservation, preventing evictions through the legal system, the role of landlords as stewards of affordable housing, and moving upstream to prevent evictions. Today's session will focus on landlords and their essential role in preserving affordability. Our country's housing system only works when all the pieces fit together. Communities and buildings need owners that keep them safe and well maintained. Landlords need tenants to cover operating expenses, and tenants need stable, affordable homes in order to thrive. The relationship between these groups are so important. There are more than 6 million renters at risk of eviction nationally. BIPOC renters and Black women in particular face the heaviest burdens. Evictions have a negative consequence for everyone: renters, landlords, and communities, on top of the trauma eviction causes for families who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. It also doesn't make economic sense. We know that it's more cost-effective to keep people housed. Housing providers both have a front row seat and a vested interest in supporting the housing stability of their renters. But it's a complicated situation. Housing providers are facing financial strain and uncertainty. They are working to support tenants facing job losses and health crisis, protect their frontline staff from COVID-19, and maintain properties despite increased costs and decreased income. Today, I'm honored to be joined by an amazing set of speakers who will discuss their firsthand experience as housing providers. They will discuss the challenges they and their renters are facing and how they're supporting their residents and protecting the nation's valuable affordable housing stock. Thank you to our speakers and the more than 700 registrants listening in today. First, I'm happy to introduce Maria Torres Springer, Vice President for U.S. Programs at the Ford Foundation. Maria is a powerhouse in the industry. She has 15 years of experience leading housing community development in various roles with the City of New York, and she has continued that commitment to people and communities through her work at the Ford Foundation. Maria, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome to everyone. Thanks to the entire Enterprise team for hosting today's webinar. I'm just so thrilled to be able to help open this session where, as Jacqueline mentioned, we'll be hearing from housing providers, experts across the country about the challenges that they're facing in the wake of the pandemic. But of course, we'll also be able to spotlight various innovative strategies that they have developed to support their tenants. Now, we are, of course, I don't have to tell anyone in this webinar series that we are coming together at a really critical time for the housing movement and our country. It is a unique time when in the very same moment, we face both extraordinary challenges and, in my opinion, unprecedented possibilities. So with the highest levels of job losses since the Great Depression and an ongoing global pandemic as a backdrop, we all know that our enduring problem of housing insecurity continues to rage. There are statistics that I'm sure most of us have memorized that might at this point seem hollow, but they continue to me to be staggering. For example, we continue to find that in no state or metropolitan area or county in this country can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home, and that over 7.5 million extremely low-income renters are spending more than half of their income still on housing. Meanwhile, more than 220,000 people in the US experience homelessness on sidewalks or other unsheltered locations on any given night in 2020. And importantly, as Jacqueline mentioned, we all know that housing affordability continues to be a racial justice issue made clearer than ever during the pandemic. So even if the economy recovers rapidly and completely from the downturn caused by COVID-19, millions of renters continue to struggle without significant multi-sector support. But there's also, of course, much reason to be optimistic. Local and federal momentum, together with a national spotlight on housing, provide us, I think, with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build broad-based support and enact bold solutions, to translate emergency programs to more enduring changes to the system, to essentially move from crisis to transformation. But that's the type of work that we all know requires actors all throughout the system to collaborate and adapt in new and innovative ways. But we have shown that it can be done. I've seen so many great examples of multi-sector partnerships during the pandemic. Project Parachute, led by Enterprise, for example, allowed a network of partners to work collaboratively to help tenants across New York City to access resources, to connect to financial, workforce, and other critical services. Now, in this case, a coalition of over 40 leading owners of market rate and affordable apartment buildings, not-for-profit service providers really came together to keep vulnerable New Yorkers in their homes. We at Ford were really happy to support this initiative, in particular because it's specifically aimed to reach those who have limited or no access to government resources, including undocumented households and shadow economy workers. So it's been a really dynamic partnership between private, public, philanthropic, and not-for-profit sectors. And that is precisely, in my opinion, the type of approach that will be needed as we continue to face one of the biggest economic, health, and housing crises of our lifetime. And that's why today's conversation, this installment of the webinar series, is so important. Our amazing guests will offer their unique perspectives on preventing eviction, stabilizing tenants, and honest discussion about how those efforts may be challenging given financial losses that they're incurring, but also how they might be changing business practices as usual. And that is a great thing. They'll also talk about challenges in engaging tenants, but how they are working to create trust in order to overcome those obstacles. Finally, our panelists will weigh in about long-term systems change and what government, philanthropy, and the private sector can do to ensure that the next set of crises does not result in a housing emergency of the magnitude that we are facing today. So we really do hope that today's session will be useful, it will be informative, as we all of us throughout the system in each and every one of our roles works in common cause to ensure that all families have access to safe, dignified, and affordable homes. So thanks again for being with us, for taking the time. I hope you each get a lot out of today's session. And with that, let me turn it back over to Jacqueline.
Well, first of all, thank you, Maria. I always say tenants need landlords, landlords need tenants. We go further together. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Patrick Jordan, our Vice President of Integrations, to introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. As Maria mentioned, we now have a roundtable with diverse perspectives of housing providers, including a national nonprofit, a national for-profit, a community-based nonprofit, and a private landlord participating in a rent relief program. These speakers are going to discuss their on-the-ground perspective of both the challenges housing providers face, as well as the opportunities we have to implement eviction prevention first approaches and to more deeply support our residents' housing stability now and in the long term. Our panelists include Gail Philo, President of Enterprise Residential, Dante Latson, the Executive Director of Rocky Mountain Communities, Trevor Samios, Vice President of Connected Communities for Wind Communities, Van Scott, who is both Director of Development for Bridge Housing in Southern California and a private landlord. And first, leading us off, we have Michael Butchko, Vice President of Business Intelligence for NeighborWorks America, to discuss the landscape of what housing providers are facing at a national level. Michael?
Thanks very much, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about NeighborWorks America. NeighborWorks America is a congressionally chartered and funded nonprofit supporting organizations that provide communities with affordable housing, financial counseling and coaching, training, resident engagement, and collaboration. At the foundation of the NeighborWorks mission are nearly 250 network organizations in every state, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. As Jacqueline mentioned, the focus of today's conversation is on landlords, and the NeighborWorks network of nonprofit organizations own and or manage nearly 185,000 rental homes across the country. I wanted to give you some stats about what those organizations have experienced from the beginning of the pandemic, just to ground us in what the last 18 months have been like. From the beginning of the pandemic, NeighborWorks organizations with rental properties added additional resident services at both a greater scale and new programs. Our network of organizations serving renters provided over 1.3 million individual services to their tenants and other renters in their communities. Notably, around half of those were related to providing food and basic necessities. Network organizations also directly assisted nearly 70,000 households with cash resources for rental assistance. Additionally, our network of organizations reported a significant rise in scam activity, and they deployed campaigns to attempt to combat those scams. In order to meet all of these challenges and community needs, we also saw NeighborWorks organizations adding staff at an unprecedented rate. The network added more than 1,000 staff since the beginning of the pandemic, an increase of 6% over the previous fiscal year's staffing level. For example, we have two community action agencies in Maine who each hired more than 30 staff in the summer of 2020, as the local communities they served lacked the infrastructure to provide the needed support and assistance in response to the pandemic. All of these urgent community needs increase the demand for resources that these affordable housing nonprofits were providing. At the same time, again, from the landlord perspective, the NeighborWorks network experienced a significant rental collections loss. NeighborWorks organizations reported a loss of around $143 million in residential rent collections from March 2020 to April 2021. That's about $12 million per month, or an 11% collections loss rate. These losses are at about 10 times the rate of pre-pandemic rental collections losses. Additionally, NeighborWorks organizations with commercial properties saw their collection rates plummet to around 50% in May of 2020, and those rates stayed below 60% until February of 2021. So that's a good 9 months with roughly half of the commercial rental collections coming in to help support the programs that these organizations provide. This is an incredibly challenging combination of increased demand for critical services and reduced revenue. We have been surveying our network organizations about their perceived sustainability. in order to provide the most appropriate assistance and interventions. What we found is that for the first few months of the pandemic, NeighborWorks organizations provided rental housing were concerned about their ability to remain operational for longer than 12 months. In terms of strategies to deal with this crisis, over 90% of the NeighborWorks network applied for the Paycheck Protection Program funds, and almost all applying organizations received funding for a total of $134.2 million in the first round alone. For our part, NeighborWorks America also provided direct funding to network organizations. The funds have helped with back rent, payroll, personal protective equipment, and more. We began distributing that funding across the US in 2020 to network organizations who knew where the dollars would have the most impact in their communities, including almost $5 million in emergency flexible grants to 239 nonprofits to help continue their vital services. We distributed an additional $3.5 million through a critical relief fund to support delivery of services, purchased and enhanced technology, and providing emergency services to residents. And in partnership with the Wells Fargo Foundation, we distributed over $10 million through the Rental Resiliency Fund to provide liquidity to organizations with rental portfolios by supporting renters experiencing financial challenges, meeting infrastructure and technology needs, and helping to bridge financial risks resulting from the pandemic. Outside of funding, NeighborWorks America continues to convene organizations at regional levels and within lines of business cohorts to share strategies for how organizations are staying resilient. We've also been offering webinars and other trainings to help organizations navigate this challenging time. However, the localized challenges with emergency rental assistance are definitely an aggravating factor. For example, NeighborWorks organizations own and manage over 38,000 rental units in California. And as of the end of June, California had only disbursed 10.5% of its first round of emergency rental assistance. We know that current trends around home prices, low rental vacancy rates, increasing construction costs, and employment market instability will continue to challenge rental housing providers in the network. We also know that these organizations are making trade-offs around maintenance and pausing new construction as revenue flows are less than predictable. So that's the NeighborWorks perspective. To offer the enterprise community partners perspective on current issues and strategies, I'd like to introduce Gail Philo, President of Enterprise Residential. Gail?
Thank you, Michael. As he mentioned, I'm part of the Enterprise family. So I'm here today to represent the nonprofit mission-based aspect of property management. Enterprise Residential is the property management division within Enterprise. We have over 11,000 units in 102 properties across the Mid-Atlantic, which is almost all of Enterprise's owned real estate. We serve about 20,000 residents, and we offer a vigorous resident services program through our partnership with Enterprise's Community Impact Strategies Group. So in thinking about this topic for today, I realized that we are now at that really critical intersection of mission and business. Of course, we need our residents to pay their rent so we can continue to offer affordable housing to all of our residents. But our mission focus demands that we treat our residents with care and with empathy for their issues, be they financial or otherwise. So for us, it's a real balancing act. I know we all keep hearing in the press about the pending eviction tsunami, but I'm proud to say that we aren't seeing that in our portfolio. Excluding rent relief, 96% of our billed revenues have been collected during the pandemic through the hard work of our site teams. We are also really fortunate, however, in the makeup of our portfolio. About 50% of our properties are senior properties and who have seen no lapse in payments of Social Security or pensions. About 40% of our properties are also subsidized by HUD, and there's been no lapse in payments from HUD. So financially, we've been able to weather this storm. But we do recognize that unpaid rent is just one issue for our residents. And we understand that sometimes rent is not paid because our residents have to choose between food or medicine and rent. So we try to understand why somebody isn't paying. Is it joblessness, underemployment, illness, disregard for or not understanding the impacts of not paying? Or are they simply gaming the system, and using the eviction moratoria as an excuse not to pay since they know our hands have been tied as landlords? Once we know the reason, the property management and resident services teams jump in to find residents resources and assistance. And we've done quite a bit of work for our residents. For example, with community partners, we created food pantries at our Baltimore properties to assist with food security. We hosted a job fair for our residents in the local community. We formed a partnership with Walgreens and Giant Pharmacies to sponsor COVID vaccine clinics across our portfolio, which now include COVID boosters, shingles, flu shot clinics, and so on and so on. On the rent front, like so many others, we offer repayment agreements. We've been waiving late fees, and we've been encouraging transfers to apartments with more affordable rent or a lower set aside. And where possible, we have been approving early lease terminations for those residents who simply can no longer afford to pay their rent. We frequently distribute information on emergency rental assistance programs or ERAP resources and other community resources to help our residents. In April, we began positive credit reporting for rent paid on time to give our paying residents a boost in their credit scores. And last year, we hurried up the deployment of our online resident portal for credit card and ACH payments to make it easier for residents to pay. And at the same time, we began accepting partial rent payments, which we had never done before. But like many of you, our most time-consuming work is focused on ERAP, and we take an all-hands-on-deck approach to that, wrapping in our resident services team members, because in some locations, each application can take 1 to 2 hours per resident to complete. But our efforts are worth it because to date, we have secured almost $7.5 million in rent relief for our residents. And, you know, from a landlord perspective, we monitor all of this. We track collections weekly. We focus our biggest efforts on our critical watch list properties, which are those most at risk due to low collections and low resident engagement. And, you know, all of this, however, is focused around avoiding evictions. And so what about evictions? Well, we have committed to only filing failure to pay rent cases on those residents who have refused to engage with us. If they have a repayment agreement, working with us on rent relief submissions or other support, then they're welcome to continue living with us. And that's that intersection of mission and business. And so what does that really look like for us? Using our DC portfolio as an example, out of about 2,600 households, 500 of them have balances over $500. But only 50 of those households are not working with us. And that's the group that's most at risk. But we haven't given up on them. We continue our outreach efforts, and we are seeing that the courts will ultimately help reach us, right? So if you follow the news, you've undoubtedly seen that the legal system in many places is looking for both landlords and tenants to demonstrate their efforts to work together to solve the issue of unpaid rent. Courts are now embedding ERAP specialists, legal aid, and mediators as eviction prevention measures. And it's pretty clear that mediation will be a key part of landlord-tenant proceedings in the future. And in some jurisdictions, including DC, renters are even required to apply for rent relief as part of the court process. So that will all help. And we all know that the courts are woefully behind in scheduling landlord-tenant cases, with current filings being pushed into late 2021 or even 2022 for hearing dates. And if you couple that with the typical 3 strikes rule and a backlog of cases in most courts, actual evictions for an August failure to pay rent filing will probably not happen until well into next year, if at all. So I would caution you, laws are changing rapidly to extend tenant protections. As landlords, we all need to keep up with them to stay in compliance. At the end of the day, this is good news for our residents who may simply need more time and resources to recover from their pandemic losses. And that, again, is the intersection of mission and business for us. So now for another perspective, I will turn the mic over to Dante Latson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Dante Latson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Rocky Mountain Communities. We are based in Denver, Colorado. We develop, own, and manage affordable housing communities across the state. We also provide resident services. So many of the challenges mentioned previously, we too are experiencing at our properties that are subsidized. The accounts receivable range anywhere from 0 to 3%. So we're doing fairly well there, but at our multi-family workforce properties, that's where the variance is much greater and the accounts receivable much higher. So we are dealing with that. Also, one of the challenges I would add that we have seen is trying to hire and retain qualified staff. That has been a challenge, and it seems that at least Rocky Mountain Communities and the organizations I've spoken to, that we are a part of that number of, I think, roughly 11 million vacancies. So that has been a challenge for us. Some of the staff perceptions around the misinformation that's out right now. And I think just the whole fear and the uncertainty and unknown of what we're facing right now, certainly the emotional toll on staff and residents, that's been a part of it. So for us, one of the strategies that we have implemented is we have decided to have a health expert come in to share with the team, first and foremost, field questions, and really try to better educate and also hope to help debunk some of the misinformation that's out there. And in terms of resident services, previously we had a fairly robust program or programming, but of course now with COVID around, it has made us, it certainly created a challenge, but the way that we have decided to view it is that this is an opportunity for us to reimagine how we provide resident services, and also utilizing more of a team approach, cross-discipline, as Gail mentioned. Some of our efforts to date include an ongoing food pantry. Previously or prior to COVID, the pantries were intermittent or as needed, but they have continued ever since COVID. We too have also hosted vaccine clinics, testing sites, as well as some of the repayment agreements. Internally, as a team and an organization, much credit to our board of directors, but they created a rent relief program, and it was largely funded by our board members and donors, and their willingness to reach out to donors. And this was in August of 2020. So we also want to make sure that we are doing a better job of being more present during these times, because initially when COVID happened, of course, or came about, the thought was, well, once things get a little clearer, we don't know right now, let's just be very cautious about it. But with the numbers being the way that they are, we know that now the opportunity is to get as much information as we can, because that was something that we recognized as a team, is that we did not have the connections or the relationships that are really desired and needed in order to in order to gain their trust. So in addition to what our board did, of course, we're hitting the ERAP pretty hard here. And we've combined ERAP research as well as surveys. In the past, we have sent out surveys, and they were fairly standard surveys, but we really pushed the team and the organization to dig deeper, because we do desire to have deeper and more meaningful relationships that are not rooted in transaction, but they really are rooted in relationship. Because growing up and as a person with lived experience, I know how systems are viewed. So we really had to push so that our staff and team could embrace really viewing our residents as partners. And I love what Jacqueline mentioned. That's right, we need one another. We also implemented a special pay for essential staff, also as well as some of the bonuses, and then thinking around equity with some of our survey work and other work. We wanted to make sure that all of our team members had an opportunity to participate if they desired, because the reality is, especially living in a metropolitan area like Denver, many of our staff members are the working poor. So it was very important that we took care of them and that they knew how much they were valued and that we couldn't do it without them. So that proved to be helpful. We also held a Village Fest, which was a celebration, but still within the confines of the safety measures. But it included residents and participating, a flea market, a full-on concert, and 90% of the participants were our residents. And this took place at Arroyo Village, which is the second of its kind in the country. It's a shelter, a combined shelter, permanent supportive housing, and workforce housing. And so we're excited about that. And then finally, I would just mention that what we've done, hopefully that will be of assistance, and big shout out to our partners at Enterprise Communities. But we were granted funds that we were hoping that would allow us to pallet at one of our properties, our largest property. But we had since had to pivot and make several adjustments. And Katie McKenna and the entire team, they've been great with us. And now we've been able to implement, or we will be able to implement, a laptop program, which includes access to laptop and Wi-Fi for all of our residents at all 8 of our properties. So just really excited about that. And I think that's it for me. And so I'll turn it over, and now I want to introduce Trevor Samuels, who is the Senior Vice President of Connected Communities at Wynn Companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dante. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dante said, I work for Wynn Companies. I'm the Senior Vice President of Connected Communities. Wynn is a Boston-based national developer and owner of multifamily housing, and one of the largest operators of affordable housing in the country. We manage 600 rental communities across the nation on behalf of a very diverse range of clients: private owners of all types and sizes, nonprofit groups, CDCs, resident-owned affordable housing co-ops, and public housing authorities. We manage mixed income communities that utilize a wide variety of federal, state, and local housing subsidies. And we also manage 10,000 unrestricted market rate apartment homes. We do this work in 23 states and Washington, D.C. So my team, Connected Communities, is the social impact arm of our organization, and we support communities through place-based services and program coordination that work to connect residents to vital resources, things like childcare, food, career growth, healthcare, resources that both address real need for individuals and families, but also those that produce measurable outcomes for the community at large. So we're all fast approaching another trip around the sun here, and I think it's important that we root part of this discussion about housing stability within the context of the past 19 months that we've all collectively been a part of. We've seen the COVID public health pandemic, national unrest, and an ardent and ongoing call for social justice and housing reform, a tumultuous presidential election and the continuation of an incredibly bipartisan political environment, unprecedented unemployment and growing economic inequality, families grappling with food insecurity, mounting debt, school closures, childcare challenges, and finally, housing instability, as all these elements are running parallel to one another. Within our ecosystem of affordable and mixed income housing, this played out with massing of delinquent rent across households of all incomes, deferred preventative maintenance and capital projects, owner challenges with mortgage and tax and vendor payments, deferred landscaping, security, resident services, payroll challenges for many, property management teams, our community coordinators, maintenance staff, all essential employees that have been helping to support residents with food, childcare, unemployment, rental delinquency, healthcare, remote school, COVID testing and vaccinations, prescriptions, transportation. That list goes on and on and on, all while also trying to balance their own needs as parents and individuals also facing the pandemic. As Dante said, we've also been going through unprecedented staff turnover and retention challenges, and in many ways an identity crisis for our industry, or as Maria said earlier, a moment of opportunity here to think through. So to this last point, many assess the current crisis around housing stability in either or terms, from either the property owner's perspective, grappling with mounting rental delinquency, or the resident's perspective, navigating overwhelming past due rent in the midst of nearly 2 years worth of cumulative uncertainty and financial hardship and trauma. Over the past 19 months, what we tried to do is approach this continued challenge as a shared one, an ecosystem in which a deep focus on housing stability can both reduce evictions and homelessness long-term, but also preserve much of the rental income that owners and operators need to maintain quality rental housing. We believe, as housing owners and operators, that rent is fundamental to a functioning housing market, but also that renters should have a safety net when they fall on hard times through no fault of their own. Our experience over these past 19 months that I'll get into a bit demonstrates that we can make eviction our last resort rather than the age-old efficient response. So we were fortunate in that in early 2020, we launched the National Housing Stability Program. It was actually 1 month to the day before COVID-19 was given its name in March. We followed this by imposing a national eviction moratorium within our own portfolio and communicated this broadly to residents in our communities. The goal of our program pre-pandemic was to reduce evictions for non-payment of rent by 50% across our nationwide portfolio by 2025. And we were going to do this through a combination of upstream, early, and consistent interventions that featured education and two-way communication and hands-on assistance. We've been following 4 key elements through our program. One is providing residents education on their rights and lease responsibilities at multiple touch points, from move-in to recertification to renewal, and working with our partners to connect residents to local resources like mediation, counseling, legal assistance, and financial coaching. 2 was working through achievable, affordable, and sustainable payment agreements. So taking things out much longer to 9, 12, 13 months where necessary. Implementing accountable housing stability goals rather than eviction metrics for both our on-site property management teams, but also for the 100 law firms that work with us across the country. And finally, imposing a strong focus and accountability on robust coordination and assistance in completing emergency rental assistance applications. So we went through our collections operations, soup to nuts, and we learned every ERAP program we would engage with throughout the country. We revised our property management systems and standard operating procedures to streamline collections and outreach, created reporting to hold ourselves accountable. We created a tailored program focused on housing stability and a training for every state within our portfolio. And then we walked 1,800 property management staff through each piece of those upstream efforts. And then we started implementing that work. We approached this organizationally as a culture change. The pandemic and the moratorium and the emergency rental assistance programs nationwide allowed us an environment in which these programs could be refined as we went, while also providing a safety net support to stabilize the assets themselves. We began with consistent communication to all of our residents that regardless of the situation that they were facing, if they were willing to work with us, we were willing to work with them to avoid eviction. Since April 2020, we've been able to help more than 31,000 households of all incomes, about 72,000 adults and children avoid eviction through our housing stability program. We've done this through benefits and unemployment assistance application, holistic, responsible rent payment agreements and rent payment options, coordinated mediation, and emergency rental assistance application submission and process takeover. We've really tried to own that last component. The result is that we've had 0 evictions for non-payment of rent since the start of the pandemic amongst all of those households participating. I think a key part here is emergency rental assistance generally. The federal government and the past administration and the current one approved $46 billion to sustain an ecosystem of rental housing, while also providing moratorium to be in effect to counter the dual health and economic crises that were affecting our communities. I say ecosystem because the CARES Act, ERA 1 and ERA 2, collectively known as emergency rental assistance, were intended to support both property owners and residents. In order to make the rollout of the ERAP program as successful as possible, our team participated all across the country in over 20 working groups assembled by state, county, and municipal emergency rental assistance grantees to support their design, the implementation, and the administration of those funds. We participated in forums held by the housing industry, legal services community, low-income housing and homelessness advocates, and many other sectors, sharing our tools, our program widely. At the state level, we worked with state leadership, housing finance agencies, philanthropies, housing and community development departments, and many others to address program glitches as ERAP rolled out, provide real-time feedback on the portals and application processes, to support our peers, large and small, and ourselves in raising awareness about the program. And at the local level, we helped to convene our peers to share best practices across 50 cities nationwide. We held 54 separate 2-hour trainings to walk team members through every step of these programs, how they worked, from the application to the consent processes, to the submissions, to the portal logins. Our property managers, community organizers, maintenance teams, and regional staff have worked tirelessly. And I think that's a really important part of the narrative here. Thousands of hours to identify and engage eligible households through every touch point at our disposal, complete and submit applications, support residents in other ways outside of rental assistance. We engaged partners, local churches, schools, youth organizers, employers. We called resident focus groups. Just for context, prior to the pandemic, we supported delinquent renters in accessing an average of about $500,000 a year in rental assistance across our portfolio. In the past month alone, we've submitted over $2.5 million in emergency rental assistance applications. And since April 2020, we've coordinated access to over $25 million in rental assistance for households facing financial hardship. That program, and these programs generally, are the single most important components of our housing stability focus. And I recount all this not to boast about our efforts or to make it seem as though we're the only organization doing that hard work. Every group here today, and likely all of you listening today, are going through the same thing. There are thousands of property owners, management companies, CBOs striving every day to help support access to those funds. But I offer this detail instead to point out that despite the tremendous resources and focus we've been able to bring to bear, we still have identified over 15,000 households who are eligible for rental assistance, but who have not yet participated successfully in our program and stand at risk for eviction. So what that leaves us with is our client owners, the organizations we manage properties for, are still carrying over $32 million in delinquent rent. So before we go to discussion and additional folks, I think the silver lining from our perspective is that there's an incredible amount of collaboration and momentum across the housing industry, resident advocates, the legal system, community-based organizations, and resident leadership to tackle this challenge. And we're really excited to take part in ongoing discussions like this one to, as Maria said, focus on enduring reform. Thank you. I will hand things over to Van, our next speaker now.
All right, well, thank you very much. I've got 2 hats I'm wearing. So I'm going to share, I work with a group, an organization called Bridge Housing, and we pride ourselves on being the largest nonprofit, affordable and market rate developer on the West Coast, covering California, Oregon, and Washington. And so that's kind of what I do on my day-to-day. But today I'm speaking as a small property owner. I have an 8-unit building in South LA. Excuse my dog in the background. But I have a small 8-unit building in South LA. So some of the issues, some of the obvious issues, as folks have talked today, I've been really kind of working with my tenants who've been unable to pay their rent. Kind of early on, as everyone, we were unsure how long the pandemic was going to last. And so folks were able to kind of sustain themselves with their unemployment for those who were able to collect it. But then as things wore on, things kind of got a bit more serious in terms of the amount of unpaid rent that I was not receiving. So that was part of the challenge. Another part of the challenge was just kind of getting my tenants to wear their mask. If there was some work that needed to be done, because I had contractors who were beginning to pull back themselves, which folks don't talk a whole lot about. But they were, not opting to do work because they needed to kind of, keep themselves healthy. And so kind of working with my tenants to wear masks and later to get vaccinated, which is still kind of an ongoing challenge because not all of them are vaccinated, but we're working through that. So kind of those are kind of the obvious challenges. Some of the strategies we're really working through with tenants on kind of paying a portion of their rent as best they could, and then helping them to kind of navigate the systems that were new for myself too, in terms of some of the state assistance and the City of LA assistance programs to kind of help with back owed rent. I had one tenant who was fortunate enough to get some assistance from the City of LA, but it was really for only 3 months. Her outstanding balance, kind of ballooned to 9 months. So that assistance, although it helped her in the short run, it really didn't help her in the long run. And so, as a small property owner, I kind of pride myself on being able to kind of maintain a reserve, but that reserve was kind of what I began tapping more into as things continued to drag out. So kind of as a small property owner, I went from not only being kind of as folks say, the landlord, but kind of a social worker, a healthcare advocate, and a referral agent for jobs. I consider myself to be pretty resourceful. And so kind of directing my tenants to work opportunities in and around where they lived and where they live. And so, it's as of now, almost, we're coming up on 2 years in the pandemic. I've got really just one tenant who continues to have kind of struggle in terms of work opportunities, but I think her health, I think there's some anxiety with her going back to work, but we've got to work through that because you can't not pay rent forever. But kind of the part I'd like to really focus on for today is kind of through a locally based nonprofit called Coalition for Responsible Community Development, CRCD, known by those of us who live in Los Angeles. This group, along with some of the partners on our panel today and involved in putting this on, developed a program called LROC, which is Local Rental Owners Collaborative. And they took kind of this, this statewide assistance program in a big city like LA, assistance program, and they brought it down to a local level. And so I know them personally and professionally, but just one day happened to be talking to them, and they talked about this program that they were developing. And I just like, hey, my property is in your target area. I've got over half my tenants are struggling and paying their rent. What do I need to do to apply? And so went through with them and their staff on participating in this program. And, it was, I wish there were programs like them throughout the city of LA, throughout the state of California that take, more of a local approach to providing assistance to smaller landlords. And so kind of walking through that with them, I was able to get all of my, basically bring all of my tenants current. At the time, the commitment from the landlord was that they would take care of 80%. I had to forego 20%, which was more than okay, as opposed to having 100% non-paid. And so through that program, we'll work through kind of completing the application process and meeting all the additional kind of question and answers that they needed, just to kind of verify kind of how things were and that tenants had in fact not paid their rent. So it was really seamless. Obviously, they had some things they needed to tighten up as a new program, but overall, compared to what I'd gone through with the city of LA, this program was a godsend. And so they have even stretched it, expanded it even more to help, for those landlords who need it, how to kind of help them manage the finances of their property, how to help them also with maintenance referrals, and they're kind of working on some renovation opportunities as well that I look forward to participating in. But it's kind of that strategy by this group has really helped a group. I think last time I spoke to them, they had about they were, I think, closing in on 70 small property owners like myself that were participating in the program. So it's a really a great opportunity, and kind of from a strategic standpoint, and a tenant stability standpoint, I appreciate them and the work that they're doing. And with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to our moderator, and hope to answer questions that folks may have regarding the program more specifically. But it's all yours, Patrick.
Thank you, Van. And I also want to make sure we thank the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative for their support for that program for LROC. They've been a great partner, and they're the reason we were able to support landlords like Van through that initiative. Thanks to all the panel for some great points and a diversity of perspective. I think that's exactly what we were hoping to hear. And I'm going to kind of kick us off with a question that was a common question in the chat. I think several of you had a chance to mention the increased services need for residents during the pandemic. Your efforts trying to meet those needs, even at the same time that you were facing at least some reduction in rent collection. So a common question we saw was how you found the means to pay for the additional resources, staff supports, in light of the financial impact that the pandemic and higher rental arrears had on your bottom line. So whoever would like to take that first.
I'd just say that I placed my answer in the chat, so I'll allow someone else to speak.
So we have decided that fundraising is a full-time job, right? There's just never enough money to go around for this. I have the great fortune of being embedded in a development company. So we have a source of revenue from development, from property management fees, but it's never enough. And so we have been aggressively pursuing fundraising, and we'll continue to do that after the pandemic is over, because I think the higher touch of resident services that we're providing now will become a new normal.
Yeah, I'd concur with Gail on that. I feel like what we heard from our organizations is that one, local partners were finding more flexibility in what they provided funding for, again, based on significant needs. But two, there was not nearly enough funding available to meet the needs, right? So it was one of those where it's more funding than was expected, but also the demand was still quite great.
I'd add only, I think it's kind of balancing the current or the business needs. So as an example, I think our average coordinator brought in somewhere near about $280,000 in emergency rental assistance in 2020 through really taking over the application process. So for us to invest in sustaining existing staff, obviously, but also adding in new staff to help support that effort was supporting our business. So every eviction we avoid, runs us about $4,800 per eviction when we consider all of those costs added up on average. So investing in services that prevents those things helps folks, live sustainably where they are with the supports they need. Generally pays off for us in a business case as well.
Thank you. That was great. I think another kind of foundational factor that I'm sure we're all working on is really in kind of building and maintaining trust with our residents. I I know that we've heard from lots of providers that, residents often see housing providers as housing provider first, not necessarily as kind of trusted partner in the services they may need. So just want to ask if there are any strategies that you found to be particularly effective with kind of building and maintaining trust as you look to encourage residents to apply for the ERA program.
So I'll go back to a comment I made in my remarks that, we often will spend an hour or two with each resident on the ERAP process. And a lot of that is time spent educating them on the benefits that are available to them. And it's not just ERAP, sometimes we're enabling them to apply for SNAP or TANF or, other benefits that are available that they're not aware of. Where it gets really difficult, and I saw this in the chat, is that perception that someone does not want to take a government handout. They don't want to be perceived as taking Section 8 or charity or something like that. That's just spending time with residents, telling them the benefits that are available to them, and really working with them to help them get over that hurdle if they can. And not all residents can. I mean, we all have residents who have refused to, to take advantage of these resources.
And similar to what Gail said, we've had the benefit of, for the past 4 years, we've done one-on-one consultations with each household. So anywhere we have services, we meet annually with each household at lease renewal, at recertification. And we use that as an opportunity to catch up, see how we're doing, see how our programs are working, but also to gather feedback from folks on their needs, on their interests, and it helps us make better referrals and helps us do better program coordination and helps us, budget better based on what people actually would like to see in the community. So I think we'd built up some stability of trust through that. We'd held resident focus groups, throughout this. So residents who had participated and worked with us with emergency rental assistance, gathering feedback from them on what was persuasive, what kind of got them over the line, and then working with those teams to also talk to their neighbors. I think the big part of it too was just understanding the context, right? Like people were traumatized by the pandemic, by financial hardship, there were language barriers, there have been technology barriers, they're at home with their children. There were so many, thousands of reasons why people, were not necessarily answering those phone calls or coming to us. And so I think part of it was just some empathy and understanding that those are real reasons and understandable reasons. And one of the biggest ones was that if you owed $20 or $30 or $40,000 in rent, it's pretty hard to believe that there's a government program out there that might have been poorly marketed in your community that is going to help you cover all of that. So it is an ongoing process and certainly one where we have a lot of folks who are still not responding, but we're just keeping at it until the programs are further reformed.
I would say that for us, it has really been sort of a philosophical shift for our organization. I think probably like most traditional housing organizations are just businesses. You have divisions, and it can really ruin things. So I think it was through COVID that we really had the opportunity to focus on the why and constantly bringing the team back to the why, that it's much bigger than our discomfort, and any discomfort that we might be experiencing is likely to pale in comparison to what they're going through. So we knew that we needed to really adjust how we were working and not just focused on programs, but really how could we have a deeper, more meaningful impact. And it required us to have those conversations and really let go of ego, which ultimately meant us reaching out to our community partners who are experts in many ways at doing this work, because they've always been doing this work. And also may not be seen as a part of systems. and that we know that we have our work cut out for us, so that people will begin to have a greater degree of trust with us. We also increased our communication efforts with residents in the various ways that we're doing it. It's Rent Cafe, email, Facebook, and other opportunities. Sorry, you have to forgive the 2-year-old in the background screaming. Sorry. But it was through those key partnerships that we have learned quite a bit, and really acknowledge again that folks are bringing pieces to the table that we just might not have right now. As I mentioned in the opening, really sort of moving away from silos and focused on team solutions and working together versus divisions. And I think we've done a really good job, but we've been pretty fortunate. And I also think it's a result of the hard work and the fact that we've been vigilant about it. But I think that we have hopefully gained some of the trust because of how seriously we are taking this virus. And, we'd like to think that as a result, we've had very few infections. So we're continuing to do that. And then I think last, just before I turn it over, I would once again just mention the laptop program. It's also through enterprise communities. It's going to allow us to hire residents. And we've used some funds like that in the past, really looking at where's the best use of it. Is it here with our team, or is it putting it in the pockets of those that we serve?
I would just add that part of the challenge, for the smaller landlords was just access to information and resources. Early on, the ERAP, and I've been following a little bit on the chat. So early on, the programs were only available for tenants to apply for. And I had tenants who were kind of intimidated by the process. And so it's taken time to kind of walk through that with them. At some point, they allowed property owners to apply directly. And that's kind of the beauty of the LROC program, is that it was like property owner driven. And then they kind of confirmed the information the property owner provided by kind of confirming with the tenants. And so it kind of helped. And then, kind of everyone walking through it together. And so some folks, I think one guy was talking about kind of, just some property owners are just not as sophisticated as others. And it just kind of, it's hand holding them as well. But it's also, we've got to do a better job at kind of connecting and understanding the resources that are around in our communities. And my work world and my private world, kind of overlap in that regard. But there are lots of resources out there, and it's just a matter of, again, as I shared that, I was not only the property owner or the landlord, but the social worker, the job referral agency. But I had to find out about job opportunities that were out there and kind of direct and help my residents kind of go after those and make some shifts because things were different. So it's kind of, each one teach one, but kind of, a network of small property owners I know is beginning to kind of develop in the LA and Leimert Park area. And that sounds like that's needed in other areas as well, just so we can kind of help direct people to other opportunities, whether it's Section 8 or, there's a big need for veteran housing that also comes with subsidies. There are also for transition age youth, and there are programs that help them pay for their rent as well, and social services. But yeah, I do realize that I kind of am a little closer to that than most small property owners, but am willing to share that as we have done with other folks. And so more of that needs to be done.
Thank you, Van. Thank you to everybody. Next question. While the pandemic has really brought a spotlight to the housing stability needs across the country, it also gives us a chance to re-envision our business as usual practices, even in normal times. So what practices can and should be continued beyond the wake of kind of the immediate crisis?
Well, I'll just, that last point I made with, it's not a business practice, but it's kind of looking at a network of small property owners. Because I felt like, my work world, I could see how, these larger property owners are able to access and get the attention of the city and of the folks at the state level, kind of their issue, because they've got hundreds or thousands of units that they're dealing with. Whereas, folks like myself, we've only got a few. So it gets a bit frustrating, but being able to network and share resources, and then to better understand the resources that are in the community, because it's kind of, if it's not the pandemic, or this pandemic, what happens, we've got lots of businesses that have closed, we've got new businesses that are opening. How do we kind of direct our residents to those opportunities? How do we build that trust that, yeah, I want them to pay their rent, but also want them to kind of be able to live, and thrive. But somehow we've got to be conduits of information and resources for the folks that live within our developments.
Yeah, I think there are, 1,000 practices that could and should be implemented and held fast as we go along here. I think, first and foremost, just empathy, right? Like we all work in housing. We all work in affordable and mixed income housing. Like our goal is to keep people housed, for communities to, become platforms of economic mobility. So I think a big part of it is education for property owners, for property managers on the impacts of eviction, right? It's easy to disassociate yourself from what actually happens when someone's evicted, the black mark that follows you in credit, what happens if a child's listed on an eviction record, the loss of a housing voucher, all of these things that, not to mention all the social determinants of health, the mortality implications. I think there's a great deal of education there. Orientation, how we move people into a community, how we explain to them their rights and responsibilities, but also so that their first call could be to their landlord when they run into financial hardship, when they're in trouble, versus normally when it might be their last call. How we communicate, and create open lines of communication. How we offer rental assistance as an amenity at properties, service that's available to people if and when they run into trouble. Code of conduct for housing attorneys, how people act in court and the services that are offered to people there, and making sure that if and where property owners and managers are hiring them, that they're, acting in that way. So I think there are a ton. We dropped I put in the chat the program we created just as an example in Massachusetts. But there's a list of practices there that landlords large and small can adopt pieces of if they chose to. And I know, Enterprise has resources much the same.
I just add that the LROC program has been great. But post-pandemic, it would be great for a program like this to continue for folks who have hardships. Obviously that gets a little tricky, but we always say, we've got tons and tons of renters who are a paycheck away from being homeless. So how can a program like LROC be around for a family who's able to make the case for, hey, we've got this issue, we need to get, it's going to take us a few months to get over this hurdle. And then maybe, and I know the work that CRCD is involved in. They can even help with job placement, job training, retraining. But for a program like this to exist, evictions are expensive. I've been a small property owner for 20, almost 30 years. I've never gone through a formal eviction. I've gone through the start of the eviction process a couple of times, and so, but don't care to kind of have, to go through that exercise over and over and over again. But if I would, and it's never been because of non-payment of rent, it's been for other stuff where folks really needed to go. But for a family, I've got a single mom, she lost her job. But let's just say she lost her job during post-pandemic. And because of the business close, can LROC help her not only with the payment of her rent, but also the retraining and at least the opportunity to refer her to another work or even a career opportunity. It would be nice to see that kind of stuff continue. In LA, we have work source centers that do that kind of work. But I do like the neighborhood approach of CRCD and their program, that it would be nice to see that kind of continue in a new form once we're out of the woods, whenever that is.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned you've had to wear lots of hats of late. Have you had any successful strategies or practices in terms of connecting residents to job opportunities?
Yeah, I've had two. And they have, it's kind of, one went through the process with a local work source center that I'm familiar with. She worked on, a job opportunity came up for her, but then her other job came back. And so, she needed to keep her main one, but she was hopefully going to kind of keep that other one as a part-time. And then for the others, it just kind of, folks have to sometimes get outside of their comfort zone. So, I continue to refer, but continue to encourage them to go through these training programs. So it just, it's ongoing. But, I can understand frustration, but, folks keep at it. They keep applying. And they want to work, and I think that's what keeps me going with them. I mean, there are some folks who say they want to work, but then kind of as you dig a little deeper, they really don't, which was kind of some of the challenges early on with people getting unemployment. But just really, again, educating folks is like, unemployment doesn't last forever. It's it will end. But it's kind of balancing that with their, really being afraid of catching COVID in a work environment. And so kind of understanding that that was all very real and real for us too. I mean, it's, kind of just trying to kind of walk that through together.
Thank you. Dante, I wasn't sure if you might want to address either that question or the one beforehand. I think I spoke right as you were about to a minute ago.
That's fine. I mean, I can just add a few that have not been mentioned. So I know for us, and it's been echoed throughout though, is the authentic relationships between staff and residents, where it doesn't feel as transactional. And for me, that's really about recognizing the humanity of residents despite the stressors. Van made a good point, everybody's experiencing this, but how do we still see the humanity in those that we serve? And when possible, the use of resident services and community groups, multiple methods of communication, and other organizations may be further along. But for us, what we found is that the information we had was, at least, or, at last research. And again, for the population, you might have 5 number changes in a year's time. So just trying to think of how we can keep up and not only what we are comfortable with as a staff, but what really works for the residents. But I'd also say, and this is wording we use, being intentional about community building and understand that this is an opportunity that if residents are going to trust us, it's going to be because we were here during a time like this of uncertainty, and whatever that looks like, we work with that. And not to mention the community partnerships, of course, in the hands of many make for light work, or in this case, I don't know about light work, but makes it more reasonable to accomplish, and just focused on the bigger picture and the reality that we're all adding to the collective. We will continue with the comprehensive surveys that are more strengths-based and not just rooted in what the needs are. We want to know what their assets are and what their strengths are. And a big part of that is because of, I think, what we're experiencing right now. If it doesn't shift, I've heard it and read on it as being referred to as the Great Recession. And if that is the case, then even with our residents, what's our role? Can we help prepare them to retool? And so some of the efforts we are doing, it was really as a direct result of what's going on right now and where we find ourselves, but I think we need to continue.
Thanks, Dante. I know looks like we may have lost Scott. I've heard Gail talk in the past about Enterprises Residential's decision to host a job fair as something they had heard at one of their properties, did it with some partners, encouraged folks from other nearby communities to participate. I think a lesson from that was over the summer, it was when we thought we might have gotten past the pandemic before the Delta variant, and it really served as more of a community building, kind of coming out to meet neighbors you hadn't seen in a year or more, and really served as kind of a party in a sense. At the same time, it was a job fair. Just wanted to pass that along, hopefully, as we get to whatever may be the next phase. For anybody who's thinking about doing that, it was even more successful in terms of the response that we heard from residents than just connecting residents to jobs. It was also kind of a little bit more about community building. So going forward, as you guys are thinking about funding eviction prevention efforts over the long term, are you seeing ways that you could fund stability into the financing process? Are you seeing kind of needs for additional resources or policy advocacy to support kind of long-term financial viability of support and services like these, along with kind of the preservation needs?
I'll jump in. So for Rocky Mountain Communities, we're proud members of a local organization, Neighborhood Development Collaborative. It's a CDC and policy-oriented nonprofit, and they really do a great job of organizing. It's made up of about 18 or 19 organizations, mostly housing or affordable housing. And they were able to share some information from it was research from the Division of Local Affairs, National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I believe the Common Sense Institute and several others. But it provided us a detailed diagnosis and prognosis of some of the recommended treatments to alleviate the housing issues. And so one of the pieces it pointed to was that each state has its own coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery. I believe it's SLFR funds. And so we need that to increase housing stability, an opportunity for the folks who are vulnerable for displacement. And just real short with that data shared was that based on the data, the fundamental cause of our statewide affordability gap and consequential pandemic highlighted housing instability hinges on a lack of affordable rental and home ownership supply. So simply put, too many people are housing cost burdened and too few affordable homes exist to help. So this policy group and neighborhood group recommended the following, and we certainly agree with it, but it's developing affordable units along the full housing spectrum, securing land for future development, making grants instead of loans to nonprofits, serving the lowest incomes, and then finally leveraging these funds from adjacent sectors that benefit affordable housing.
Thank you, Dante. I do want to make sure we touch on a couple additional questions from participants. So a question, do any of you see some resistance from tenants to share their personal issues and information with staff? Do you have active third-party agencies that can help step in to help the tenant? I'm in a rural New York area. We have a big problem aligning tenants with a one-stop service agency to meet their needs.
I'll just jump in. I'll say our experience has been, it depends. Depends on a number of things, the property, the dynamics of the property, the staff and how deeply they are owners of the process. And then some of what's going on with residents. What we have found through our ERAP efforts, and we've now on our second eviction moratorium, which was prior to the state or the feds implementing, we find that a lot of people are they are following through with us. It's a small number of people who refuse to, but I think that is inverted. It's sort of the 80-20 rule.
Yeah, I don't know if it was so much them being resistant to sharing their information as it was being able to navigate the systems.
Yeah, agreed. I think, some of these programs are pretty complicated, the equivalent of doing your taxes by yourself. Some of them require two-factor identification and text messages response within 48 hours or else your application is scrapped. There are a lot of different rules between municipalities and counties and states that make these programs really complicated, even with landlord or community-based partner assistance. One thing I think that just as a shameless plug here, but if it's helpful to folks, is to Google HR 1596. HR 1596 was a bill put forth by the House Financial Services Committee Chair Maxine Waters from California and her team. Some bipartisan support, but not altogether there yet, as most things are in this environment. But it's emergency rental assistance program reform, and it allows a number of things, based on a lot of what we talked about today and a lot of what I'm seeing in the chat. It allows landlords, large and small, to apply directly for rental assistance on behalf of renters through informed consent, which means you don't have to have a resident's signature or a full-on, attestation or the tax documents or unemployment paperwork to apply, which is a big efficiency for us, especially if we want to help people. It allows, it mandates that the allowance of property owners to apply for delinquent rent on behalf of folks that might have moved out. So if you're a small landlord and you have 2 rental units out of 4 and 1 person left, and you're carrying a year's worth of rent, allows you to recoup that funding. It allows for ERA 1 and ERA 2, these two behind the curtain rental assistance programs, to be joined together so that they allow a uniform 24 months of safe harbor for the grantees. It allows the bulk applications by and bulk payments to landlords. So if you have 100 units at a property that are behind on rent, you can submit via a spreadsheet versus 100 separate applications and a lot of background information. And then to the initial question, it also makes explicit that ERAP grantees, so states, cities, counties, can use technical assistance funding to directly fund community-based organizations for outreach. So paying organizations that have those relationships on the ground to reach out locally and to work with landlords, to work with residents, to get over some of these barriers and build trust or leverage that trust to help more people get help. So definitely worth looking up. It is a limited time frame of passage, so we're hopeful that there's more support amongst the housing community for its passage, because it's, frankly, there's not another option on the table.
Yeah, just piggybacking really quickly on what Trevor mentioned, I was on a Federal Reserve panel last month, and we had a long conversation comparing and contrasting the Paycheck Protection Program and its success with any emergency rental assistance programs. And so, hopefully policymakers can kind of think about what those differences were and why one has been so much more effective. And the other thing I just want to call out is the digital divide, right? I mean, I think we've all learned, those of us who are forced to work at home, how speedy our internet is. Now imagine folks that aren't, so much internet conversant and are expected to go through all of these hurdles to apply for things on their own. So I know folks were talking about trust earlier. I don't know that it's so much a trust issue as it just is a barrier to entry, because they're completely unfamiliar with all of these various things. And the expectation is just go online and sign up. And it's really not fair to tenants and residents to put that on them in the midst of everything else that's going on in this pandemic.
I absolutely agree with that, because 50% of our portfolio are seniors. And, not stereotyping here, but there's a large component of that group that do not have smart devices. And so we spend a lot of our time managing with them if they need to access these programs. And so I think, in the broader scheme of things, these programs need to be accessible to everyone.
Those are really, really great points. And I want to just really thank, as we're wrapping up, all the panelists. Thank Maria, thank Jacqueline. It's been a great discussion. I also want to thank the enterprise team behind the curtain for putting this session together and for the other sessions. We are going to be sending out follow-up information to all who are registered so that you can have the recording. And our next webinar will be in October on upstream challenges to increase housing stability. Thank you for the time, and hopefully see you next month.